My name is Rachel, and at 30 years old, I hold 23 keys on a ring that jangles against my hip with every step I take. For 17 years, I've been haunted by the memory of a single door, one that refused to open for me on a freezing November night when I was just 13. My parents always introduced me as their difficult daughter, the one who asked too many questions, the one who didn't fit into their perfect family portrait. But everything changed the day a stranger knocked on my office door, asking for help with housing, and I found myself staring into my mother's desperate eyes for the first time since childhood. If you are watching this video right now, I would love to know where you are from. Drop it in the comment section below. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about family relationships that take unexpected turns. The pasta was overcooked again. I remember watching the cheap noodles slide off my fork like wet cardboard, landing with a soft plop back onto the chipped ceramic plate. My father sat at the head of our cramped dining table, sighing heavily between bites, shuffling through a stack of bills with one hand while he ate with the other. Each envelope he opened seemed to deepen the lines around his mouth. My mother stared at the wall behind me, her eyes focused on nothing, mechanically lifting her fork to her mouth in a rhythm that never changed. She could have been eating sawdust for all the expression on her face. My younger sister, Emily, clutched her ratty doll against her chest, picking at her food with her free hand, those wide blue eyes darting between our parents like she was watching a tennis match where the ball never got served. The air in our kitchen was thick with more than just the smell of overboiled pasta and margarine. It was the kind of tension that made your shoulders creep up toward your ears, made you chew quietly so you wouldn't be the one to break the silence. I was 13 years old, and I already knew that silence could be louder than screaming. Emily's teacher called today, my mother finally said, her voice cutting through the quiet like a dull knife through tough meat. She was talking about Emily, always about Emily. She made honor roll again. My father's face softened for the first time all evening. He reached over and ruffled Emily's hair, and she beamed up at him like he'd just handed her the sun. "That's my smart girl," he said, and the warmth in his voice made something cold settle in my stomach. I had made honor roll too. My report card was sitting in my backpack, waiting for someone to ask about it. No one did. This was how it always was. Emily got the smiles, the hair ruffles, the "that's my girl." She got tucked in at night with stories and kisses on the forehead. I got suspicious looks when I walked into rooms, sharp words when I asked for help with homework, and a mother who flinched when I tried to hug her. I used to think it was because Emily was younger, needed more attention. But she was only 2 years behind me, and the difference in how they treated us was like comparing sunlight to shadow. When Emily laughed, they laughed with her. When I laughed, my mother would look at me sideways and ask what I was up to. The first time I really understood that something was wrong was when I was 11. I'd drawn a picture in art class. The teacher had asked us to draw our families. While the other kids drew stick figures holding hands in front of cheerful houses, I drew something different without really thinking about it. I drew our house, dark and imposing, with 3 figures visible through the lit windows. The 4th figure, me, stood outside in the rain looking in. Mrs. Peterson had held up my drawing and called it creative and metaphorical. She'd given me an A and a concerned look that lingered a beat too long. But I hadn't been trying to be creative. I'd just drawn what felt true. "Why don't you ever hug me?" I'd asked my mother once, maybe 6 months before that last pasta dinner. We were alone in the kitchen, and she was washing dishes with her back to me. Her shoulders had gone rigid at the question. "Stop being dramatic," she'd snapped, scrubbing a pot so hard I thought she might scrape through the metal. "You're too old for that nonsense." But Emily wasn't too old. Emily got hugs every morning before school, every night before bed. Emily got her hair braided while my mother hummed old songs. I got told to brush my own hair and stop asking for things. The small rebellion started after that. Nothing major, just little acts of defiance that felt like screaming underwater. I'd ask questions at dinner that I knew would annoy them. "Why does Emily get new shoes when mine have holes?" "Why can't I join the school band if we have money for Emily's dance classes?" "Why did you tell Grandma I was sick when I wasn't?" Each question earned me a glare from my father, a tightening of my mother's jaw. "You're being difficult again," became their favorite phrase. As if existing and expecting basic fairness was an act of war. 3 weeks before they locked me out, there was an incident with my grades. I'd gotten a B+ in math, my hardest subject, and I'd worked my ass off for that B+. But when report cards came home, my father had fixated on it like it was a personal insult. "Emily gets straight A's," he'd said, waving my report card like evidence in a trial. "What's your excuse?" "Math is hard for me," I tried to explain. "I stayed after school for tutoring 3 times a week." His fist came down on the table so hard the glasses jumped. Emily's milk tipped over, spreading white across the wood like spilled paint. "If you can't follow the rules," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "then you don't belong here." The words hit harder than any slap ever could. They hung in the air between us, and I saw my mother nod slightly, just a small movement, but it was agreement. Emily stared at her spilled milk, not moving to clean it up, not moving at all. "What rules?" I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "What rules am I not following?" But he was already standing, already walking away. My mother followed him, leaving me to clean up the milk while Emily sat frozen in her chair. The night it happened, the night they locked me out, started with another argument. This time it was about my attitude. I'd come home from school and found Emily wearing my sweater, the only one without holes, the one I'd saved babysitting money to buy. She asked to borrow it. My mother said when I protested. "She didn't ask me," I shot back. "Everything in this house belongs to the family," my father interjected from his recliner. "Stop being selfish." "Then why is Emily's room off limits? Why can't I borrow her things?" "Because Emily respects boundaries," my mother said. The irony of that statement while Emily wore my sweater was too much. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that surprised even me. "This is insane," I said. "You know this is insane, right?" My father stood up slowly, deliberately. At 6'2", he knew how to use his height to intimidate. "Go to your room," he said. "No," I said. The word came out before I could stop it. Not until someone explains why I'm treated like a stranger in my own home. The silence that followed was different from our usual tense quiet. This was the silence before a storm breaks. My father's face went red, then purple. A vein in his temple pulsed visibly. "Get out," he said, very quietly. "What?" "Get out of my house. Go cool down on the porch." It was November in Michigan. The temperature was already dropping toward freezing. But I was 13 and angry and tired of being the family scapegoat, so I grabbed my thin jacket and stormed out, slamming the door behind me hard enough to rattle the windows. I sat on the porch steps for maybe 20 minutes, watching my breath fog in the cold air, waiting for my anger to cool into something manageable. I could go back in, apologize, pretend everything was fine. I'd done it before. I could do it again. When I finally stood up and reached for the door handle, already preparing my apology, it didn't turn. I tried again, thinking it was stuck. Nothing. I knocked, softly at first, then harder. "Mom," I called through the door. "Dad?" "The door's locked." I heard footsteps approach from inside, heard my father's voice through the wood. "Find somewhere else to sleep." The words didn't make sense at first. I stood there, my hand still on the doorknob, trying to process what he'd said. "Dad, it's freezing. Let me in." "You wanted to act like you don't belong here," he said. "So don't." "Dad." I pounded on the door now, panic rising in my throat. "This isn't funny. It's cold. Please." The footsteps retreated. The house went quiet except for the muffled sound of the TV being turned up. I ran to the living room window, could see the blue glow of the screen, but not the people watching it. I banged on the glass until my hands hurt. That's when I saw her, Emily, standing at her bedroom window on the second floor. She was watching me, her small face pale in the darkness. She pressed one hand against the glass, and for a moment I thought she might open the window, might throw down a key or call for our parents to let me in. Instead, she just stood there, those wide eyes I'd envied so many times now filled with something I couldn't read. Fear? Pity? Relief that it wasn't her? I'll never know because after a moment, she stepped back and pulled her curtains closed. I spent that night curled up on the porch, my back against the door, wrapped in my thin jacket and shivering so hard my teeth chattered. Every sound became amplified in the darkness. The chirp of crickets, the distant bark of a dog, the occasional car passing on our quiet street. I kept thinking someone would open the door, that this was just a particularly cruel punishment that would end when they thought I'd learned my lesson. When the first pale light of dawn started creeping across the sky, I was still there, stiff with cold, my fingers numb. I tried the door again. Still locked. I looked through the mail slot and could see my backpack sitting in the hallway where I dropped it the day before, could see the family photos on the wall where my face looked out from behind the glass, smiling in happier times that I could barely remember. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't a punishment. This was permanent. They had actually locked me out of my own home, my own life, my own family. At 13 years old, I had become homeless because I dared to ask why I wasn't loved the same as my sister. I stood up on shaking legs, my joints protesting after a night of cold and stillness. I had nowhere to go, no one to call. My grandparents lived 3 states away and barely knew I existed. My parents had made sure of that. I had no close friends because I'd been too ashamed to invite anyone to our house, too embarrassed by the obvious difference in how my parents treated Emily versus me. With nothing but the clothes on my back and the terrible understanding that I was completely alone, I walked away from that house. I didn't look back, but I carried the image of Emily's face in that window with me. It would take years before I understood that she was a victim too, in her own way, a child being taught that love was conditional, that it could be withdrawn at any moment if you stepped out of line. But that morning, all I knew was that I was 13 years old, and my childhood had ended on a cold porch in November, locked out by the people who were supposed to protect me. The social worker's car smelled like stale coffee and disappointment. I'd been found 3 days after the lockout, sleeping in the playground tube slide at the elementary school I used to attend. A jogger had called the police, thinking I was a runaway. I guess technically I was, though it's hard to run away from a home that won't let you in. Mrs. Henderson, the social worker, kept her eyes on the road while she drove, occasionally glancing at me in the rearview mirror like I might evaporate if she looked too long. She'd already tried calling my parents. My father had answered and told her I was no longer their responsibility before hanging up. Those words echoed in the space between us as she drove me to my first foster placement. "The Millers are good people," she said, her voice professionally cheerful. "They've been fostering for 10 years. What she didn't say was that the Millers took in kids like a business, maximizing their monthly checks by cramming as many foster children as legally allowed into their 4-bedroom house. When we pulled up to the beige split level, I counted 3 other kids visible through the windows. I would soon learn there were 6 of us total. Mrs. Miller answered the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was a heavy woman who moved with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to manage chaos through rigid control. "You must be." She glanced at the paperwork Mrs. Henderson handed her. "Rachel. You'll be in the back bedroom with Kayla and Destiny." The room was small, with 2 bunk beds crammed against opposite walls. My bed was a thin mattress on the bottom bunk, the sheets worn soft from too many washings. Kayla, a black girl about my age with beautiful braided hair, barely looked up when I entered. Destiny, maybe 15, was applying nail polish with the focused intensity of someone trying to maintain one small piece of beauty in an ugly situation. "Don't touch my stuff," Destiny said without looking at me. "Don't borrow anything. Don't even look at my side of the room too long." I wanted to tell her I understood boundaries, that I'd just come from a house where I wasn't allowed to touch anything either, but I just nodded and sat on my assigned bed. The Millers had 2 biological children, twins, a boy and girl about 10 years old. That first dinner showed me exactly where I stood in the hierarchy. The twins sat at the dining room table with their parents, eating what looked like pot roast with fresh vegetables. The foster kids sat at a card table in the kitchen, eating hot dogs and canned corn. When I started to sit at the main table by mistake, Mr. Miller's sharp, "That's not your place," sent me scurrying to the kitchen. "You'll get used to it," Kayla whispered. "Or you won't, and they'll move you somewhere worse." The house had a chore chart, but really it was a foster kid chart. We scrubbed bathrooms, vacuumed, did laundry, washed dishes, and maintained the yard while the Miller twins played video games or went to their various activities. When I complained once that my hands were raw from using bleach without gloves, Mrs. Miller reminded me that I should be grateful for a roof over your head. School became my escape and my torment simultaneously. The work was easy. I'd always been smart, even if my parents hadn't noticed. But the social dynamics were brutal. Somehow, everyone knew I was a foster kid. The whispers followed me down hallways. She's the one whose parents didn't want her. I heard she got kicked out for doing drugs. My mom says to stay away from the foster kids. I ate lunch alone, hiding in the library doing homework for classes I hadn't had yet just to keep my mind busy. The librarian, Miss Foster, the irony wasn't lost on me, started leaving books on my usual table, stories about kids who survived impossible things, who built new lives from ashes. I never thanked her directly, but I think she knew they helped. 2 months into my stay at the Millers, I made my first foster care friend. Ashley was new, fresh from a situation she wouldn't talk about, but that had left finger-shaped bruises on her upper arms. She was tiny, with white blonde hair and eyes that looked too old for her 14-year-old face. We bonded over our shared invisibility, our mutual understanding that we were temporary people in a permanent world. "We'll stick together," she promised one night, painting my nails with polish she'd stolen from Destiny's stash. "Even when we age out, we'll be each other's family." We made plans. We'd get an apartment together when we turn 18. We'd both go to college, her for nursing, me for something, anything that would make me matter. We'd prove everyone wrong about foster kids. We'd prove we were worth keeping. 6 weeks later, Ashley was adopted by a couple from 2 towns over. She left on a Tuesday while I was at school. When I came home, her bed was stripped, her few possessions gone.
No good vie.
No forwarding address. The Millers had her new family's contact information, but when I asked for it, Mrs. Miller said it was best for everyone to move forward, not backward. I cried myself to sleep for a week, muffling the sounds in my pillow so Destiny wouldn't mock me for it. But Destiny surprised me one night by sitting on my bed and saying quietly, "The first one who leaves always hurts the most. After that, you learn not to get attached." My mother started sending letters about 3 months after the lockout. They came sporadically, always brief, always focusing on how I should behave. "Make sure you're following the rules. Don't embarrass the family name. Your sister asks about you sometimes. I tell her you're fine. Never, 'I love you.' Never, 'I miss you.' Never, 'I'm sorry.'" I kept every letter in a shoebox under my bed, not because they comforted me, but because they were evidence that I had existed in that house once, that I hadn't imagined having a family. My father never wrote. Through the foster care grapevine, kids talking to kids who talked to other kids, I learned he left my mother, moved 2 states away with a woman from his office. The divorce was ugly, apparently. My mother got the house and primary custody of Emily. My father got his freedom and a fresh start without the burden of the daughter he'd locked out. The knowledge that he'd left them too should have made me feel vindicated. Instead, it just made me angry. He got to choose to leave. I hadn't been given that option. Emily's 13th birthday came and went. I knew because I'd snuck onto a library computer and looked at her social media. The pictures showed a party in our old backyard, streamers, a 3-tier cake, at least 20 kids from her school. Emily wore a crown that said "Birthday Princess" and smiled so wide it must have hurt. My mother stood beside her in one photo, arm around Emily's shoulders, looking at her with the kind of maternal pride I'd seen other kids' mothers display, but never experienced myself. I stared at those pictures until the library was closing, searching for any sign that someone had noticed my absence. There wasn't one. No empty chair at the table. No mention in the birthday post comments about a missing sister. It was as if I'd never existed at all. That night, I made myself a promise. Sitting in that bottom bunk in a house where I was nothing more than a monthly check, I whispered into the darkness, "I'll never need them again. One day, they'll need me, and I'll remember this feeling." It became my mantra, my prayer, my fuel for survival. School remained my lifeline. My English teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, Notice my essays were far beyond grade level. "You write like someone twice your age," he said after class one day, holding up my paper on symbolism in To Kill a Mockingbird. "Have you thought about entering the state writing competition?" I hadn't, but I did. I wrote about doors, the ones that close, the ones that lock, the ones we build ourselves. I won second place and a small scholarship that would sit in an account, waiting for me to turn 18. The Millers moved me along after 8 months when they decided to take in younger kids who required less supervision and came with higher monthly payments. My next placement was with a single woman named Janet who had 3 other foster girls and a drinking problem she thought she hid well. Janet's house was chaos. She'd pass out by 9 most nights, leaving us to fend for ourselves. The older girls taught me how to forge her signature on school forms, how to stretch $20 of grocery money across a week, how to look presentable enough that no one asked questions. It was at Janet's that I learned the foster care shuffle, the way kids moved through the system like we were playing musical chairs, except when the music stopped, nobody wanted you to sit with them. I had 6 placements in 4 years. Some were better than Janet's, some worse. None were home. The day I aged out of foster care, I stood outside the group home with 1 suitcase and $762 in my pocket, every dollar I'd managed to save from under-the-table jobs and the occasional birthday card from a social worker. I was 18 years old, and for the first time in 5 years, I was truly on my own. The system that had been my reluctant guardian was done with me. My first apartment was a studio above a Chinese restaurant. The smell of soy sauce and garlic permeated everything I owned within a week, and the pipes rattled like they were possessed whenever anyone in the building used water. But when I turned the key in that lock for the first time, my hands shook, not from fear, but from the sheer power of it. This key was mine. This door opened for me. The apartment was 300 square feet of water-stained ceiling and peeling linoleum, but I stood in the middle of it that first night and spun in slow circles, arms outstretched, touching nothing but air that belonged to me. No roommates to navigate around. No foster parents checking if I was following their rules. No biological family pretending I didn't exist. Just me and 4 walls that I could lock from the inside. I worked 3 jobs to keep that apartment. Monday through Friday, I stocked shelves at a grocery store from 4 a.m. to noon. 3 evenings a week, I waitressed at a diner where truckers left decent tips if you kept their coffee full and laughed at their jokes. Weekends, I tutored middle school kids in math and English. Ironic, considering math had been my worst subject, but I'd learned that being 1 chapter ahead was all you needed to teach someone else. Most nights, I collapsed into my twin bed, a luxury after years of suspicious mattresses, at 2 or 3 a.m., only to wake up 3 hours later and do it all again. I was hungry constantly, tired always, but I was free. That freedom tasted better than any meal I skipped to pay rent. Helen found me during my 3rd month of this grinding routine. She was a regular at the diner, a 60-something black woman who always ordered the same thing: coffee, black, and wheat toast, dry. She'd sit at the counter reading paperback novels, occasionally glancing up to watch me navigate the chaos of the dinner rush. One particularly bad night, when I'd been cursed out by a customer for bringing him regular instead of decaf, and my manager had threatened to dock my pay for the mistake, Helen stayed after closing. "You're running yourself into the ground," she said, not a question but a statement. "I'm surviving," I replied, wiping down her section of the counter for the 3rd time just to avoid eye contact. "Surviving isn't living, child. It's better than the alternative." She studied me for a long moment, then pulled out a business card. "I run a nonprofit that helps young women transition from difficult circumstances. We have job training programs, educational support, counseling if you want it. Come see me when you're ready to do more than survive." I held that card for 2 weeks before I worked up the courage to visit her office. Helen's nonprofit, Doors of Change, operated out of a converted Victorian house. When I walked in, I expected to find another institution, another place with rules and judgments and people who saw me as a problem to be managed. Instead, I found Helen in a sunny office with plants everywhere and a coffee maker that gurgled in the corner. She offered me a cup, good coffee, not the burnt stuff from the diner, and asked me one simple question: "What do you want to do with your life?" No one had ever asked me that before. Not my parents, not the social workers, not the foster families. I'd been so focused on survival that the idea of wanting something beyond the next meal, the next month's rent, seemed impossibly luxurious. I don't know, I admitted. That's a fine place to start, Helen said. Not knowing means everything's possible. She helped me enroll in community college, navigating the financial aid forms that might as well have been written in ancient Greek for all I understood them. When I got my first semester schedule, just 2 classes, all I could manage while working, I cried in her office. Don't let their rejection define your future, she told me, handing me tissues. The best revenge against those who said you were worthless is building a life of worth. College was harder than I'd expected, not academically, but socially. I was older than traditional freshmen but younger than the returning adults. I didn't fit anywhere, which was a familiar feeling but still lonely. I'd sit in the back of lecture halls, taking obsessive notes, terrified that if I missed one word, one concept, I'd prove everyone right about foster kids being unable to succeed. My English professor, Dr. Martinez, noticed my anxiety. After I'd turned in my 3rd paper early with apologies for any mistakes I might have made, she pulled me aside. Your work is exceptional, she said. But you write like you're apologizing for taking up space on the page.
Stop that.
Your words deserve to be here. You deserve to be here. I started to believe her somewhere around my 2nd semester. The apartment key became my talisman. Whenever I felt overwhelmed, I'd hold it in my pocket, feeling its edges, reminding myself that I had something that was mine. One night, walking home from the library, I realized the symbolic weight of it. At 13, I'd stood outside a locked door with no key. Now, at 20, I held my own key. I controlled who entered my space and who didn't. That same week, I got my first real break. The law firm where I'd been volunteering, Helen's suggestion, to build my resume, offered me a paid internship. It wasn't much money, but it meant I could quit one of my jobs and focus more on school. More importantly, it meant someone saw potential in me beyond my ability to carry plates or stock shelves. The firm specialized in family law, which felt like the universe's idea of a joke. I spent my days filing documents about custody battles and divorce proceedings, seeing families tear themselves apart with a viciousness that felt familiar. But I also saw something else. Lawyers who fought for children's rights, who made sure kids had voices in proceedings that would determine their futures. I started to think maybe I could do that someday, be a voice for kids who, like me, had been locked out and told they didn't matter. Emily reached out for the first time on my 21st birthday. The Facebook message was short. I miss you. I stared at those 3 words for hours, unsure what to do with them. Part of me wanted to respond immediately, to grab at this thread of connection to my old life. But another part, the part that had learned to protect itself, wondered if this was genuine or if she'd been put up to it. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. I wasn't ready to unlock that door yet. Dad's life, I learned through mutual acquaintances and social media stalking I'm not proud of, was falling apart. His new relationship had ended badly, something about debts and another woman. He was living in a studio apartment not unlike mine, except his was a descent while mine was an ascent. The vindication I'd expected to feel never came. Instead, there was just a hollow sadness for the man who'd chosen to lock out his daughter rather than deal with his own failures. My mother called one night, 2 years after Emily's message. I was studying for finals, running on 3 hours of sleep and too much coffee. When I saw her number on my phone, she'd kept the same one all these years. My heart stopped. Her voice was shaky, older, uncertain. We should talk. I hung up without a word, my hands trembling. Then I threw up, which surprised me. I thought I'd processed all of this, thought I'd moved past the point where they could affect me physically. But trauma, I was learning, lived in the body as much as the mind. My graduation day arrived on a bright May morning. I stood in my cap and gown, looking out at the crowd of families cheering for their children. Helen was there, in the 3rd row, wearing a bright purple dress and a smile that could have powered the entire city. A few of my professors had come. Even my manager from the diner, who'd become something like a friend over the years, sat near the back. My family wasn't there. But as I walked across that stage to receive my diploma, Bachelor of Arts in Social Work, summa cum laude, I felt powerful in their absence. This achievement was mine alone. They couldn't claim credit for it, couldn't pretend they'd supported me, couldn't insert themselves into this narrative of success. As I shook the dean's hand and heard my name called over the loudspeaker, I whispered to myself, "This time, I hold the keys." The literal keys in my pocket, apartment, mailbox, the used car I'd finally saved enough to buy, jangled with each step. But the metaphorical keys were what mattered. The key to my education. The key to my future. The key to a life where I decided who got access and who didn't. I was 22 years old, and I was just beginning to understand what it meant to hold power over my own life. The girl who'd slept on a porch at 13, who'd been told she didn't belong anywhere, was gone. In her place stood someone who had built her own belonging, one minimum wage job, one community college class, one small victory at a time. The locks my family had turned against me had taught me the value of doors that opened by choice, not obligation. And I was just getting started on deciding which doors to walk through. The real test, though, was still coming. Because healing isn't linear, and the past has a way of knocking on your door just when you think you've finally locked it out for good. The weight of the keys surprised me. My new boss, Marcus, dropped them into my palm with a casual "don't lose these," but as my fingers closed around the cold metal, I felt the universe's twisted sense of humor at work. Program Director for Home First, a housing justice nonprofit. Me, the girl who'd been locked out, now holding master keys to an entire building, model units, storage rooms, after-hours entrances, the main office. 23 keys on a ring that jangled with every step I took. "These open everything," Marcus said, already heading to his next meeting. "Guard them with your life." I wanted to laugh at the irony. Or cry. Instead, I clipped them to my belt and felt their weight against my hip, a constant reminder that I'd gone from begging to be let in to deciding who got access. The job was everything I'd worked toward. I helped families navigate housing applications, connected them with resources, fought slumlords in court, and ensured that kids wouldn't end up sleeping in cars or worse. Every family, I helped feel like a small victory against my own history. But I should have known that the past doesn't stay buried just because you've built a nice life on top of it. The first knock came on a Tuesday. "There's a woman asking for you by name," our receptionist, Janet, whispered when she found me in the filing room. "She looks rough. Says she's family." My blood turned to ice water. I knew before I saw her. Mothers and daughters are connected by more than just DNA. There's a recognition that transcends years and changes. When I walked into the lobby, she was sitting in one of our plastic chairs, clutching her purse like it contained everything she owned. My mother had aged badly. Her hair, once carefully dyed and styled, hung in gray-streaked strands around her face. She'd lost weight in the wrong way, the kind that makes you look hollow rather than healthy. When she saw me, she stood quickly, almost desperately. "Rachel," she said, and hearing my name in her voice after 7 years made me step backward instinctively. "We should talk in a conference room," I said, keeping my voice professional, distant. I chose the one with glass walls and kept the door cracked open, witnesses and escape routes, lessons learned from years of protecting myself. She sat across from me, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I studied her hands, older, spotted, with nails bitten down to the quick. The wedding ring was gone. "I need help," she finally said, the words tumbling out like water through a broken dam. "I need a safe place to stay. Just for a few months, until I can get back on my feet." "What happened to the house?" I asked, though I'd already pulled the public records. I knew about the second mortgage, the foreclosure notices. "It's complicated." She wouldn't meet my eyes. "I've been staying with someone, but it's not safe anymore. He drinks, and when he drinks, She trailed off, pulling her sleeve down to cover what looked like finger-shaped bruises on her wrist. The part of me that had become a social worker, that had trained to recognize abuse, wanted to immediately jump into action. But the 13-year-old, who'd spent a November night on a porch, kept me frozen in my chair. "There are shelters," I said. "I can give you a list." "I can pay," she said quickly. pulling out bank statements that showed more overdrafts than deposits. Or I could work, clean, do maintenance, anything. Please, Rachel. I know I don't deserve. You're right, I interrupted. You don't deserve anything from me. But I'm going to treat you like any other client, because that's my job. You'll need to fill out an application. Provide proof of income, references, and documentation of your situation. You'll need to file a police report about the abuse. She flinched. I can't do that. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. These are our requirements. No exceptions. I pushed the application packet across the table. Not even for family. Especially not for family. Her face crumpled. You'd really make your own mother fill out forms like a stranger? You made your daughter sleep outside like a stranger. I replied, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. Forms seemed like a small ask in comparison. 2 days later, before she'd returned the application, my father appeared. He looked better than my mother, but worse than his Facebook photos suggested. The confident businessman I remembered had been replaced by someone trying too hard to appear successful. Cheap suit that didn't quite fit, shoes that needed replacing, a smile that looked more like a grimace. Hey, kiddo, he said when I encountered him in our lobby, like 7 years hadn't passed, like kiddo was something he'd ever called me with affection. We're not doing this, I said, turning to leave. Wait. He grabbed my arm, gently, but it was still a grab. I looked down at his hand, then up at his face, and something in my expression made him let go immediately. I just want to talk. I heard you're doing well. I'm proud of you. The words I dreamed of hearing as a child now made my stomach turn. You're proud? Of what, exactly? Of the daughter you locked out? Of the child you told didn't belong in your house? It was a different time. Things were hard. Things were hard for everyone. Only you decided to make them harder for a 13-year-old. He shifted tactics, leaning against the counter with practiced casualness. Look, I know I made mistakes, but I'm trying to get my life together now. Maybe you could help your old man out? I heard you work with housing, and I'm between places right now. I almost laughed. The audacity of it was breathtaking. You're asking me for housing help? We're family, he said, as if the word meant anything coming from him. That night, I ran a background check on him. The results were worse than I'd expected. Multiple evictions, wage garnishments, a restraining order from an ex-girlfriend, debts that would take a lifetime to repay. He was toxic on paper, the kind of applicant we'd reject immediately to protect our other residents. He started texting from different numbers after I blocked the first 3. I'm proud of you. You've really made something of yourself. Let's put the past behind us. Each message felt like manipulation wrapped in false sentiment. Then Emily reached out again, this time with more than 3 words. I know you probably hate me, her message began. I was a coward. I watched them lock you out and did nothing. I chose the easy path, the safe path, and I've regretted it every day since. I'm pregnant now and the father is gone, and I'm starting to understand what it feels like to be alone. Not the same as what you went through, I know that. But I'm tired of choosing the winning side that always loses. Can we talk? Just us, no parents. I read her message 17 times before agreeing to meet her at a diner downtown, neutral territory where either of us could leave if needed. She looked like our mother had at that age, but worn down already at 21. The pregnancy showed under her loose sweater, maybe 5 or 6 months along. She fidgeted with a plastic straw wrapper while we waited for our coffee. I need to tell you something, she said without preamble. About that night. I braced myself, unsure if I wanted to hear whatever revision of history she was about to offer. Dad gave Mom an ultimatum that week. He said either you had to go, or he would leave and take me with him. Mom couldn't lose both of us, and you were... She paused, choosing her words carefully. You were the one who asked questions. You were the one who might tell people what our house was really like. What was our house really like? I asked, though I knew. I'd lived it. Hell, she said simply. But a hell that looked normal from the outside. And that was what mattered to them, how it looked. You threatened that because you kept pointing out the truth. She pulled out her phone and showed me something that made my blood run cold. County records from that November, showing my parents had received a relocation grant and a partial child benefit contingent on household size reduction due to domestic conflict. They got paid, I said, the words tasting like ash. They got paid to throw me away. $5,000, Emily confirmed. Enough to keep the house for another 6 months before everything fell apart anyway. I stared at the number on her screen. $5,000. That was what my childhood had been worth to them. I found out last year when I was helping Mom with paperwork, Emily continued. That's when I realized they didn't just choose between us. They sold you. The diner seemed to spin around me. All these years, I'd thought it was about me being difficult, about not being lovable enough. But it had been a transaction. A business decision. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I'm about to have a child, and I'm terrified I carry their poison in me. Because you deserve to know it was never about you. And because... She hesitated, then pulled out an envelope. I have something that belongs to you. Inside was a key. An old brass key that I recognized immediately. The house key I'd never been given. The one that would have let me in that night. I took it from the kitchen drawer after you left, she said. I don't know why. Maybe I thought you'd come back and I could sneak you in. Maybe I just wanted proof that you'd existed. But it's yours. It always should have been. I held that key, feeling its weight. Lighter than my ring of master keys, but somehow heavier with meaning. The maintenance call that changed everything came 3 weeks after my meeting with Emily. One of our partner properties needed an inspection, and the address was 2 blocks from my childhood home. I told myself I wouldn't drive by, wouldn't pick at old wounds. But trauma has its own GPS, and I found myself parked across the street from the house that had locked me out. A for sale sign swayed in the front yard. The windows were dark, empty. The porch where I'd spent that night looked smaller than I remembered, shabbier. Paint peeled from the railings I'd gripped while begging to be let in. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, engine running, that old brass key Emily had given me burning a hole in my pocket. Finally, I drove away, but the image of that sign stayed with me. 3 days later, Helen died. It was sudden, a heart attack in her sleep. One day she was telling me about her garden plans. The next I was standing at her funeral, trying to speak through tears about how she'd saved my life with coffee and tough love. Her lawyer found me after the service. She left something for you, he said, handing me an envelope. Inside was a check and a note in Helen's careful handwriting. Buy something no one can take from you. Make it yours completely. You deserve roots that you plant yourself. The amount was modest by most standards, $30,000, but combined with my savings and decent credit I'd spent years building, it was enough for a down payment. I stared at that check for a week before I knew what to do with it. I called the realtor about my childhood home. It's a distressed property, she warned. There are some complications with the title. Complications didn't begin to cover it. When I got the title report, I discovered why the house had been sitting empty. My father had transferred it to a shell LLC years ago in some scheme to avoid creditors. The LLC had never paid taxes. The county was about to seize it for back taxes, nearly $40,000 worth. But there was a loophole. If the property went to auction, the back taxes would be wiped clean. The starting bid would be the amount owed. It was scheduled for the next month. I spent weeks researching, planning, preparing. I liquidated my small retirement account, took out a personal loan, gathered every penny I could. I also discovered something else in my research. The original transfer to the LLC had been fraudulent. My father had forged my mother's signature on the quitclaim deed. The auction was held in a windowless county building that smelled like old paper and broken dreams. About 15 people showed up, mostly investors looking for flip opportunities. When the auctioneer called out my childhood address, my hand shook as I raised my paddle. The bidding started at $40,000. Someone else bid $42,000. I went to $45,000. Back and forth it went, my heart pounding harder with each raise. At $55,000, the other bidders dropped out. The house wasn't worth more than that to them. Too much work needed, too small for the neighborhood. But it was worth everything to me. Sold, the auctioneer said, and the gavel came down with a finality that echoed through my bones. The clerk who processed my payment slid a brass key across the counter along with the deed. Different from the one Emily had given me, but the same weight of meaning. I sat in my car afterward and cried. Huge, gulping sobs that felt like they'd been waiting 7 years to escape. A week later, I went to inspect my property. My house. The words felt foreign on my tongue. I unlocked the front door, my door, and stepped inside for the first time since I was 13. It was smaller than memory suggested. Shabbier. The living room where my family had watched TV while I froze outside was just a box with stained carpet. The kitchen where we'd had that last pasta dinner was cramped and outdated. But when I climbed the stairs to what had been my room, I found something that stopped me cold. Scratched into the closet doorframe, so faint I almost missed it, were the words I'd carved there the night before the lockout. I exist. I matter. Remember. I traced those words with my finger and whispered, I remember. The sound of breaking glass downstairs shattered the moment. I found my father in the living room, having jimmied the back door. He had a duffel bag and the relaxed posture of someone who thought he belonged there. Oh, good, he said, grinning when he saw me. Save me the rent money. We can work something out, right? Family discount. You're trespassing, I said, pulling out my phone. His grin faded. You can't be serious. This is my house. Was your house. Before you fraudulently transferred it to avoid debts. Before the county seized it. Before I bought it at auction. I showed him the deed on my phone. It's my house now, and you're trespassing. You little. He stepped toward me, and I stepped back, already dialing 911. The police arrived within minutes. My father tried to explain that this was a family dispute, that I was his daughter, that surely we could work this out. The officers looked at my deed, looked at the broken door, and put him in handcuffs. As they led him away, he shouted, You think you're better than your own blood? No, I called back. I think I'm safer without it. The next morning, my mother called. Her voice was different, calculating rather than desperate. If you let me stay there, she said, I'll testify that your father forged my signature on the deed transfer. I'll help you nail him for fraud. The deed's already fixed, I told her. I own it clean. Then why do you need me? She asked, and the question hung between us like a bridge I could choose to cross or burn. I don't, I said, and meant it. But something in my voice must have given her hope because she said, I could pay rent. Real rent. I got a job and I've been saving. This house isn't going to be a rental, I interrupted. I met with architects the next week, walking them through my vision. The house would be converted into transitional housing for women leaving abusive situations. 4 bedrooms, each with its own lock. A shared kitchen and living space. A security system. Every door reinforced. Every window with a lock that worked from the inside. It's going to be expensive, the architect warned. It's going to be worth it, I replied. My father, out on bail, filed a lawsuit claiming equitable interest in the property. He argued that his sweat equity from years of living there entitled him to compensation. His lawyer actually said with a straight face that my father had maintained and improved the property. Our lawyer, a fierce woman named Patricia, who'd taken the case pro bono after hearing my story, destroyed his argument with surgical precision. She presented evidence of the fraudulent transfer, the unpaid taxes, records of repairs I'd paid for myself since buying it, and then the coup de grace, a recorded voicemail he'd left me threatening to take back what's mine if I didn't cooperate. During his deposition, my father's mask finally slipped completely. You think you're some kind of hero? He sneered at me across the conference table. You were an ungrateful brat then, and you're a self-righteous bitch now. Patricia smiled. Please continue. The court reporter is getting every word. Emily testified on my behalf, submitting a written statement about the night of the lockout and screenshots of texts where our father had tried to pressure her into getting money from me. He said I owed him for raising me, her statement read. He said children are supposed to take care of their parents, that we were investments. When I refused, he said I was just like Rachel, useless. The judge not only dismissed my father's case, but issued a permanent restraining order. He was barred from coming within 500 feet of the property or me. As we left the courthouse, Patricia said, "You know, in all my years practicing law, I've never seen someone literally buy back their childhood home just to transform their trauma into someone else's healing." "I'm not transforming trauma," I said, feeling the weight of the house keys in my pocket. "I'm just making sure the doors lock properly this time." The opening was small, intentional. No press, no fanfare, just a handful of supporters and the first residents ready to move in. I stood on the porch, that same porch, with a pair of oversized scissors to cut the ribbon we'd strung across the door. "This house," I said to the small gathering, "used to be a place where doors locked people out. Today, it becomes a place where doors lock to keep people safe." The ribbon fell away, and I opened the door with one of my master keys. The inside was unrecognizable from my childhood, bright, clean, with comfortable furniture donated by local businesses. Each bedroom door had a deadbolt that locked from the inside, and each resident would get their own key. The kitchen was stocked. The living room had books, games, a TV that everyone could watch together if they chose. Helen's photo hung in the hallway with a small plaque, in memory of Helen Washington, who taught us that surviving isn't living, and that every woman deserves a door she can lock and unlock by choice. We'd been open for exactly 3 hours when the storm hit. It was the kind of Midwest thunderstorm that turned afternoon into night, that sent rain sideways and made trees bend like they were praying. I was doing final paperwork in the office we'd built in what used to be my parents' bedroom when the intercom crackled. Through the camera feed, I saw a figure on the porch, soaked, hunched against the rain. My mother. She had a split lip and a duffel bag that looked like it had been packed in a hurry. "Please," she said into the intercom. "Just tonight." I could have sent her away. I had every right to. The other staff members would have understood. The restraining order against my father didn't extend to her, but I'd made it clear she wasn't welcome. Instead, I went to the door myself. She looked smaller than she had in the conference room months ago. The rain had washed away whatever makeup she'd been wearing, revealing a black eye in addition to the split lip. "There's an intake room," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "You know the rules." The intake room was deliberately neutral, soft lighting, comfortable chairs, a camera that recorded everything for legal protection. I called Marissa, my night staff, to witness. My mother sat across from me, water pooling beneath her chair, and for a moment, I saw myself at 13, cold and wet and locked out. "Safety plan," I said, sliding the form across to her. "You have to file a police report. You have to agree to counseling. You have to follow all house rules. No exceptions." Her hand shook as she took the pen. Under emergency contact, she wrote Emily's name. "He found out about the house," she said quietly. "That you'd turned it into this. He was drunk, furious. Said if he couldn't have it, he'd burn it down with everyone inside." My blood went cold. "When?" "An hour ago. Maybe less. I ran when he went to get his keys." I was already calling 911, reporting the threat. Within minutes, we had police stationed outside. Within an hour, they'd found him 3 blocks away, passed out in his car with a gas can in the back seat. The arrest was his 3rd strike. The restraining order violation, the threatened arson, the assault on my mother. This time, he wouldn't be getting out for a long while. My mother filled out every form, answered every question, agreed to every rule. When I handed her the key to room 3, a simple brass key on a wrist coil, she held it like it was made of gold. "This opens your door only," I explained, though she'd already read the rules. "Common areas are accessible during set hours. Break any rule, and the key is revoked." "Thank you," she whispered, and for the first time since I was very young, I heard genuine emotion in her voice. Emily arrived an hour later, 7 months pregnant now, and frantic. "I got your message." "Is she?" "She's safe," I said. "She's here." We sat in the kitchen, Emily, my mother, and I, while the storm raged outside. 3 women who'd been on different sides of a locked door, now under the same roof by choice. "I don't expect forgiveness," my mother said, staring at her tea. "I know what I did. What we did." "The money," she stopped, unable to continue. $5,000, I said. That's what I was worth to you. No, she said, looking up with red-rimmed eyes. That's what we sold you for. What you were worth. I never knew. I never tried to know. And by the time I understood what we'd thrown away, you were gone. I was gone because you locked me out. Yes. The simple acknowledgement, without excuse or justification, hit harder than any apology could have. Over the following weeks, my mother became a model resident. She filed charges against my father, testified at his hearing, attended every counseling session. She cooked for the other residents, shared her story in group therapy, and slowly began to piece together a life that wasn't built on manipulation and denial. Emily had her baby, a girl she named Hope, which felt a little on the nose but also perfect. She'd signed a lease for a small apartment near the transitional house, close enough to visit, but far enough to maintain boundaries. One evening, I found my mother on the porch, sitting in almost the exact spot where I'd slept that November night. I come out here sometimes, she said without looking at me, to remember what I did. To remind myself that you survived despite us, not because of us. Why? I asked. Because if I forget, I might become that person again. And that person doesn't deserve to have a key to anything. The house thrived. We were at capacity within 2 months, with a waiting list. Women came broken and terrified, clutching garbage bags of possessions, jumping at every sound. They left with apartment leases, job interviews, restraining orders that meant something, and most importantly, the knowledge that they deserved doors they could lock and unlock by choice. My mother moved out after 3 months into her own studio apartment across town. She got a job at a grocery store, nothing glamorous but honest work. She sent me a letter, not asking for anything, just updating me on her life. I didn't respond, but I didn't throw it away either. Emily and I developed something like a relationship, not quite sisterhood, but not strangers either. Little Hope called me Aunt Rachel, and I let her, though the title felt foreign on my tongue. 1 year after opening, we held our first graduation ceremony. 5 women who'd come to us with nothing were moving into their own places. As I handed each of them their new apartment keys, I said the same thing. This key is yours. No one can take it from you. You decide who comes in and who stays out. After the ceremony, I stood on the porch again, holding my ring of master keys. 23 keys that opened doors throughout the house, plus the old brass key Emily had given me, plus the original key from the auction. They jangled when I walked, a constant reminder of the journey from locked out to holding the keys. A new resident arrived that evening, a young woman with a black eye and a scared teenage daughter. As I led them through intake, the daughter asked, "Is it true you used to live here?" "A long time ago," I said. "And they kicked you out?" "They locked me out. But you came back?" I smiled, handing her mother a room key. "I came back with better locks." That night, after everyone was settled, I did my rounds, checking doors, ensuring windows were secured, making sure everyone who needed to be locked in safely was, and everyone who needed to be locked out definitely was. As I stood in what used to be my childhood home, now transformed into something that would have saved 13-year-old me, I thought about Helen's words. The best revenge against those who said you were worthless is building a life of worth. But it wasn't revenge anymore. It was something else. It was taking the worst thing that had ever happened to me and alchemizing it into something that could prevent the worst from happening to others. I walked to the front door, that same door that had refused to open for me 17 years ago, and locked it for the night. Then I unlocked the side entrance that residents could access with their keys, because everyone deserves a way in when they need it. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number that I recognized anyway, my father from prison. "You destroyed our family." I deleted it and pocketed my phone. He was wrong. The family had been destroyed long before I bought back the house. I'd just built something better from the wreckage. The next morning would bring new challenges, funding meetings, court appearances with residents, the daily work of rebuilding lives. But tonight, the house was quiet. 8 women and 3 children slept safely behind doors they could lock. And me? I held the keys. All of them. I used to beg for one door to open. Now I decided which doors stayed locked and who got a key. The 13-year-old girl who'd slept on a porch in November would never have imagined this moment, but she'd survived long enough for me to make it real. That's the thing about being locked out. Once you finally find your way in, you never forget the cold. You just learn to build better doors and make sure you keep the keys. What would you do if the family that abandoned you suddenly needed your help? Share your thoughts and make sure to like and subscribe for more stories like this.